I never thought the quietest man in the neighborhood could pull off the kind of Thanksgiving surprise that would leave 40 people standing in an empty kitchen. My daughter-in-law smiled and said, "My whole family's coming for Thanksgiving." "About 40 people," my son added. "Dad, would you mind sleeping in the garage for a few days? My wife's parents should really have the master bedroom." That morning I took a sip of my coffee and replied, "Perfect. I'll be out of town for Thanksgiving. You two can handle the cooking, the cleaning, and entertaining your own guests." "I'm not your hired help." Their smiles vanished instantly because they had no idea I'd already arranged a surprise of my own, one they'd never managed to swallow. Before we go further, where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments. I read every single one. If you've ever had to draw a hard line with family, hit like and subscribe to Cold Verdict. You belong here. Some elements in this story are fictional, crafted for entertainment and to carry a message worth hearing. Any resemblance to actual names or places is coincidental. My name is Gerald Sinclair. I'm 60 years old, a retired high school history teacher with 35 years in the classroom, and I live alone in a 4-bedroom house on the quiet outskirts of Phoenix, Arizona. I say I live alone, but that's not entirely accurate. I live with the memory of a leaner. My wife planted every rose bush along the front fence. She picked the pale sage paint for the shutters, arguing with me for 3 weeks that it was warm sage, not gray. "Gerald, there's a difference." She built the raised garden beds in the backyard with her own hands, hauling bags of soil in the trunk of our old Buick on Saturday mornings while I stood there handing her tools and pretending I was being useful. When she passed away 4 years ago, I kept everything exactly the way she left it: the roses, the sage shutters, the garden beds, even though half of them sit empty now because I can't bring myself to plant anything she didn't choose herself. My neighbor Frank started coming over for coffee on Sunday mornings about 6 months after Alina died. He never made an announcement about it. One Sunday he just showed up at the back gate with 2 cups from the diner down the road, handed one through the fence and said, "You look like you need company more than you need to ask for it." I didn't argue with him. A man doesn't argue with that kind of kindness. That house was my peace. It was the only thing that still felt like Alina and me at the same time. Then, on a Thursday evening in October of 2022, my son Tyler knocked on the front door with his wife Kayla standing beside him and a rented moving truck idling at the curb. Tyler is 33. He works in mid-level logistics management for a distribution company downtown. He has my jaw and his mother's eyes, and for a long time I believed he had her heart too. Kayla is 30. She's sharp-featured and perpetually photographing herself, running 3 separate social media accounts dedicated to what she calls her lifestyle brand. She had 2 ring lights and a camera tripod packed before she had plates or towels. When I opened the door that evening and saw the truck, my chest tightened so hard I had to press my hand against the doorframe. "Dad," Tyler's voice cracked slightly at the edges, the way it used to when he was 12 and had broken something and needed to tell me before I found out myself. "We need to ask you something and I need you to hear us out before you say anything." Kayla was already looking past me into the house, her eyes moving quickly across the living room like she was mentally rearranging furniture. "Our landlord raised the rent again," Tyler continued, his hands gripping the strap of the bag over his shoulder so tightly his knuckles had gone pale. "We can't afford the increase and save for a down payment at the same time. We just need 6 months, Dad. 6 months to get our finances straight, and then we're gone." I promise you, my throat burned. I wanted to say no. Every instinct I'd built across 35 years of reading people, of watching which students would follow through and which would find an excuse, was screaming at me to say no. But he was my son, and his eyes were wet at the corners, and he looked so much like a leaner in that moment that my chest ached in a way I can't properly describe, like something being slowly pulled apart at the seams. 6 months, I said. That's what you're asking, 6 months, Tyler repeated. That's all. Kayla finally looked directly at me and smiled, bright and practiced. We really appreciate this, Gerald. We're going to be so respectful of your space. You won't even know we're here. That last sentence should have been my warning. People who intend to be respectful don't usually feel the need to promise it in advance. I stepped back and let them in. The first 2 months were manageable barely. Tyler helped with yard work on weekends without being asked. Kayla cooked dinner twice, though she photographed both meals extensively before anyone was allowed to eat. They were loud in ways I wasn't accustomed to, but I reminded myself that Alina and I had been young once too, and young people are loud. Then month 3 arrived. Kayla started sleeping until 10:30, sometimes 11. She'd drift into the kitchen while I was reading the morning paper, pour herself coffee from the pot I'd already made, and complain loudly that the Wi-Fi was slow while she was uploading content. She used my coffee, my kitchen, my internet, and my silence, and never once thought to say thank you for any of it. One Sunday morning, Frank came over to the fence while I was deadheading Alina's roses. He watched the house for a moment, then looked at me with the particular expression of a man choosing his words carefully. How long they planning on staying? He asked. I clipped a dead bloom and tossed it into the bucket. 6 months, I said. Frank nodded slowly. He picked up his coffee cup. He said, in the tone of a man who didn't believe that for 1 second. I didn't answer him because somewhere deep in my chest, underneath the part of me that wanted to believe in my son, I was beginning to think Frank might be right. 6 months became 7. 7 became 9. And on a cold morning in the fall of 2023, I found a bank statement on the kitchen counter that made my hands tremble so badly I had to set it flat on the table and press my palms against the surface just to read the numbers clearly. The savings account I'd spent decades building, the one I called my quiet years fund, the money I'd set aside so that when my body finally said enough, I wouldn't have to ask anyone for anything, showed a withdrawal I'd never authorized. A large one. My legs felt suddenly unreliable beneath me. I pulled out a chair and sat down hard, staring at the paper while the morning light came through Alina's curtained window and landed warm across the numbers that told me exactly what kind of trouble I was already in. I sat at that kitchen table for a long time. The bank statement lay flat in front of me and I read the numbers 3 times because a part of my brain refused to accept them on the first 2 passes. The withdrawal had cleared 6 weeks earlier. I hadn't caught it because I'd been trusting Tyler to manage the supplementary access I'd granted him for small household expenses, groceries, the occasional utility payment, nothing extravagant. The amount that was gone was not small. It was not a grocery run. It was the kind of number that takes years to rebuild when you're 60 years old and no longer drawing a teacher's salary. My eyes burned, not from tears, I was too stunned for tears just yet, but from the particular dry, hollow ache of a man staring at proof that someone he loved had looked him in the face and chosen to steal from him anyway. I folded the statement carefully, tucked it into the inside pocket of my flannel shirt right against my chest, and walked outside to the garden. Frank was already at the fence, which told me he'd seen my face through the kitchen window and decided coffee was the appropriate response. He handed a cup through the gap in the slats without a word, and I took it with hands that were still not entirely steady. You look like somebody ran over your dog, Frank said. Nobody ran over anything, I said. But I found something I wasn't supposed to find. Frank leaned his forearms on the top rail of the fence and studied me with the particular squint of a man who's known you long enough to read the spaces between your sentences. How bad? He asked. Bad enough, I said. He didn't push further. That's the thing about Frank. He knows when a man needs to talk and when a man needs to stand next to someone while he thinks. We drank our coffee and watched a mockingbird work its way through the rose bushes, and gradually the shaking in my hands settled down to something I could manage. 3 days later, the answer to my unasked question pulled into my driveway on 4 brand new tires. I was in the garden when I heard it, a deep, expensive engine purr that did not belong in my neighborhood. I straightened up and turned around, and there it was, a jet-black luxury SUV, freshly polished, with chrome trim that caught the afternoon sun and threw it back like a statement. Tyler stepped out of the driver's side with his chest puffed up and his chin lifted in a way I hadn't seen since he made varsity basketball in 10th grade. Kayla burst through the front door so fast she nearly tripped on the porch step. She let out a shriek that startled the mockingbird clean out of the roses. "Oh my God. Oh my God, it's even more gorgeous in person." She threw her arms around Tyler's neck and he caught her, laughing, spinning her once the way people do in car commercials. I pulled off my gardening gloves one finger at a time and walked toward them. "Tyler," my voice came out quieter than I intended, which is sometimes more effective than volume. That's an $80,000 vehicle." He turned to me with a grin that flickered slightly at the edges when he saw my expression. "Work bonus, Dad. The company had a killer quarter." "I earned it, you earned it," I repeated. "Absolutely," he said, without blinking, without flinching, with the smooth, practiced delivery of someone who'd rehearsed the line multiple times in the car on the way home. 35 years in a classroom taught me exactly what a rehearsed answer sounds like. It sounds nothing like the truth. Kayla looped her arm through Tyler's and beamed at me. "Isn't it amazing? We're going to take you for a ride this weekend, Gerald. You're going to love it." I looked at my son. He held my gaze for almost 4 full seconds before his eyes slid sideways toward the car. That was enough. "Congratulations," I said and went back inside. That evening, I sat at my desk and cross-referenced the withdrawal date on the bank statement against the vehicle purchase timeline I found in a financing brochure Tyler had left on the kitchen counter. The numbers aligned with the precision of a confession. The money from my retirement savings had become the down payment on that car. My chest hurt with a dull, persistent ache that radiated up into my jaw, the way grief does when it has nowhere left to go. I pressed the heels of both hands hard against the edge of the desk and breathed through it until the pain thinned out to something bearable. Then I picked up the phone and called Robert Klein. I thought about the police. I thought about it for a long time. But Tyler was my son, and some decisions a father cannot unmake. Robert has been my attorney for 11 years. He's not a warm man. He doesn't do small talk or reassurance. What he does is know the law in the state of Arizona better than most people know their own phone numbers. "Robert," I said when he picked up, "I need to talk about my situation at home. The tenants. How do I do this legally?" There was a brief pause, the sound of papers being moved. "How long have they been there, Gerald?" "Just over a year." "Then you're looking at a 60-day written notice," Robert said, his voice flat and factual, the way I needed it to be right then. Arizona Revised Statutes, Title 33. They've been in residence more than 12 months, so the law requires 60 days minimum written notice before you can initiate removal proceedings. No exceptions. If you skip that step, you have no legal ground to stand on, even in your own house. 60 days, I said. 60 days, he confirmed. I can draft the notice, but Gerald, the clock doesn't start until they receive it in writing. When do you want to send it? I looked at the bank statement one more time. Then I looked at the calendar on the wall. Thanksgiving was exactly 10 weeks away. Not yet, I said. I'll tell you when. Outside in the driveway, the jet-black SUV sat gleaming under the porch light. Frank had wandered out to his front yard and was looking at it from across the fence with his hands in his pockets. He called over to me quietly, "Does that thing even run?" "I never actually see them take it out." I leaned against the doorframe. The ache in my chest hadn't gone away, but underneath it something else was beginning to form, something cooler and more deliberate. "Not for long," I said mostly to myself. Frank glanced over at me with raised eyebrows, but I'd already gone back inside. The clock had started. I just hadn't told anyone yet. Robert sent the 60-day written notice on the 3rd of October. He drafted it on official legal letterhead, had it delivered by certified mail with signature confirmation, and texted me a photo of the receipt that same afternoon. Under Arizona law, the clock starts the moment the document is received and signed for. Tyler signed for it himself on a Tuesday morning, which meant the legal deadline for vacating the premises fell on the 2nd of December. Robert called me afterward to confirm. "It's done, Gerald. Clean, documented, airtight. If they're not out by December 2nd, we file with the court and begin formal eviction proceedings." A forcible detainer action moves fast in Arizona when the paperwork is clean. They have no lease. They have no legal standing. "The house is yours," I thanked him and hung up. Then I sat in the kitchen with my coffee and waited to see what Tyler would do with the information. He didn't mention it to Kayla. Not that day, not the next week, not the week after that. He tucked that certified letter somewhere she'd never find it and went on living in my house as though the ground beneath his feet was completely solid. I watched him make that choice every single day, and every day it told me something new about the man my son had become. By the 3rd week of November, Kayla had worked herself into a full performance-level frenzy over Thanksgiving. She'd been talking about it for weeks on her social media accounts, teasing her followers with phrases like "biggest family gathering yet," and "you are not going to believe this spread." She'd ordered matching linen napkins. She'd bookmarked floral arrangements that cost more than my monthly electric bill. She had also, at no point, asked me a single thing about any of it. The list arrived on a Monday evening, 4 days before Thanksgiving. I was at the kitchen table reading when Kayla walked in wearing a silk robe and carrying her phone in one hand and 2 sheets of heavy card stock in the other. She didn't say good evening. She didn't ask if I was busy. She crossed the kitchen and dropped the papers onto the table in front of me with the particular carelessness of someone who has never once considered that another person's time might be worth something. "I need all of this done by tomorrow afternoon," she said, her eyes already back on her phone screen, thumbs moving. "I've got a hair appointment at 10, a nail appointment after that, and content to shoot before dinner. You know how these things are," she said it the way people talk to staff. I picked up the papers. The list was extensive. 2 large turkeys from a specific butcher in Scottsdale, imported cheeses, charcuterie boards with ingredients listed by brand name, 4 cases of sparkling water, specific wines, specialty bread from a bakery in Tempe that required advance orders. Kayla had even noted her preferred ribbon color for the napkin rings. My jaw tightened until I could feel the pressure behind my back teeth. My heart was hammering with a slow, heavy beat that had nothing to do with anger and everything to do with grief. Grief for the son who was sitting 10 feet away in the living room, saying absolutely nothing, while his wife handed his father a shopping list like a hotel concierge receiving room service instructions. I read every line twice. Then I set the papers down on the table, smoothed them flat with one hand, and looked up at Kayla. "You invited them," I said. "You chose the menu. You do the shopping." Kayla's thumb stopped moving. She looked up from her phone with an expression I hadn't seen on her face before, genuine, unguarded shock, like someone had reached over and turned off a light she assumed was hardwired. Excuse me, her voice came out high and tight. The groceries on that list, I said, keeping my voice level, are for guests that you invited to a party you planned in a house you do not pay for. So you can handle the shopping. Her face cycled through 3 expressions in about 2 seconds. Shock, outrage, and then the particular cold calculation of a woman reaching for a tool she's used successfully before. Tyler, she called out, sharp and loud, not taking her eyes off me. Tyler, come in here right now. Tyler appeared in the doorway with the hollow-eyed look of a man who's been pulled into one too many of these moments and no longer believes any of them will end well. His shoulders were already hunched forward before he even knew what the argument was about. Kayla jabbed a finger at the table. Your father is refusing to help with Thanksgiving. Tell him. Tyler looked at me. Then he looked at the floor. His jaw worked like he was trying to find words that could somehow satisfy both of us simultaneously, which is an impossible thing to ask of any sentence ever constructed. Come on, Dad, he said finally, his voice dropping to something small and strained. It's Thanksgiving. We're all supposed to pitch in here. It's just groceries, that phrase, it's just groceries, as if the issue were ever about groceries. I pushed back my chair and stood up. I picked up my coffee mug, wrapped both hands around the warmth of it, and looked at my son for a long moment at the set of his jaw, the way he couldn't hold my gaze, the way he was slowly disappearing inside a version of himself I didn't recognize. Then I walked out of the kitchen without another word. Behind me, I heard Kayla say to Tyler, her voice already recovering its confidence, he'll cave. He always does. He'll be at that store by tomorrow morning. You watch. I went to my desk, picked up the phone, and called the bank. The supplementary card linked to my account, the one I'd extended to Tyler 18 months ago for household expenses, the one Kayla had been using for nail salons and designer shoes and spa days, was deactivated before I set the phone back down. The list stayed on the kitchen table all night. Nobody touched it. And by the Tuesday before Thanksgiving, every grocery store in the Phoenix metro had been picked over by families who'd planned weeks ahead. Later that night, after the house had gone quiet, Tyler knocked on my bedroom door. He stood in the hallway with his hands in his pockets, not quite able to meet my eyes. Dad, I know this is a lot to ask, he said, his voice low and careful, but would you mind taking the basement room while everyone's here? Kayla's parents are getting older and the master suite would really be better for them. I looked at my son for a long moment. He stared at the baseboard the entire time. I said nothing. I went to bed, and early the next morning, I made one more phone call. Kayla woke up the next morning absolutely certain she'd already won. I could hear it in the way she moved through the house, quick, purposeful footsteps, the snap of cabinet doors, the bright, artificial cheerfulness she used when she was performing confidence for an audience of one. She'd decided overnight that my refusal the evening before was nothing more than a dramatic gesture from a stubborn old man, and that the solution was simple. She'd go to the store herself, use the supplementary card, come home with everything on the list, and prove she didn't need my cooperation to pull this off. I was in the garden when she came through the front door, trailing a cloud of expensive perfume, car keys swinging from 2 fingers, oversized sunglasses already on, the shopping list folded in her other hand. I'll handle it myself, she announced to no one in particular, projecting her voice in my direction like she wanted credit for the decision, since apparently asking for basic help around here is too much. She didn't wait for a response. She got into the car and drove away. I watched the street settle back into quiet and felt something in my chest ease slightly, the way it does when you've been bracing for impact and the moment finally arrives and you realize the worst part was always the waiting. I went inside, poured myself a second cup of coffee, and sat down at the kitchen table. Trader Joe's on Camelback Road on the Tuesday before Thanksgiving looks like a controlled emergency. Every cart is full. Every aisle is crowded shoulder to shoulder with people clutching lists and checking phones and reaching past each other for the last remaining packages of something. The energy in that store is a particular combination of festive and frantic that I've always found exhausting. Kayla, I imagined, felt right at home in it. She would have moved through those aisles with the focused intensity she usually reserved for online shopping, decisive, unhesitating, stacking both carts high with the exact items from her list: the imported triple cream brie, the specialty charcuterie, the sparkling water in glass bottles, the wine she'd specified by vineyard and year. She wouldn't have looked at a single price tag because she never did when she believed someone else was absorbing the cost. I know exactly what the moment at the register felt like for her, because I've watched enough people receive unexpected bad news to recognize the specific architecture of that kind of shock. The cashier, a young man with patient eyes, scanned the last item and announced the total. It was a number that would have made a reasonable person flinch. Kayla handed over the supplementary card with the smooth, practiced motion of someone who has never once been told no by a piece of plastic. The terminal processed for 2 seconds. Then it beeped. A single flat, merciless beep. The cashier looked at his screen. "I'm sorry, ma'am. It's showing declined." Kayla's smile did not disappear immediately. It faltered first, a small crack running through the confidence like a hairline fracture in glass. "Run it again," she said. "It's fine." "Run it again." He ran it again. The same beep. The same word on the screen. "Ma'am, the card is being declined. Do you have another form of payment?" The crack in Kayla's expression widened. Her hand tightened around the edge of the checkout counter until her knuckles went white and her painted nails pressed hard against the laminate. She grabbed her phone with her other hand, fingers shaking slightly now as she dialed Tyler. He picked up on the second ring and she didn't give him a chance to speak. "The card isn't working," she hissed, keeping her voice low but tight, the kind of whisper that carries further than a normal voice because every word is forced through clenched teeth. "It keeps getting declined. Fix it right now. Call your father. Call the bank. Do something." Tyler's voice came back thin and helpless through the speaker. "Bri, I checked my account this morning. I don't have enough. The lease payment cleared last week and the insurance, and I don't care about that." Her voice cracked upward on the last word, drawing the attention of the woman in line directly behind her. "Figure it out." That was when it happened. A voice from 2 people back in the line said, with the particular bright recognition of someone who follows people online, "Oh my gosh, are you K lives large? I follow you. I love your content." The blood drained from Kayla's face so completely and so quickly that she looked genuinely unwell. She turned slowly toward the voice, a woman in her 30s, phone already half raised, smile wide and expectant. Kayla's mouth opened. Nothing came out. Her throat worked like she was trying to swallow something that wouldn't go down. She turned back to the cashier. "I need to leave some things," she said, her voice scraped hollow. "The wine, the cheese, just leave most of it. I'll pay for what I can." She paid for 4 bags. 4 bags out of 2 full carts. When she got home, her eyes were red at the rims and her jaw was set with the rigid, furious tension of someone who has swallowed a humiliation so large it hasn't finished hurting yet. She dropped the bags on the kitchen counter with a thud that rattled the cabinet doors. I was sitting in the living room. She looked at me and her voice came out raw and stripped of every layer of performance she usually kept in place. "The card didn't work." "No," I said. "It wouldn't. You did that on purpose." It was not quite a question. "I deactivated the supplementary card," I said. "It was attached to my account." "I'm allowed to do that." Kayla's chin trembled. For just 1 second, underneath the fury and the wounded pride, something that looked almost like genuine fear crossed her face. She pressed her lips together so hard they went pale, turned on her heel and walked upstairs. I listened to her footsteps cross the ceiling above me. Then I heard her bedroom door close, and through it, the muffled but unmistakable sound of Kayla finally crying. Not the performative tears she used to get her way, but the kind that come out when the plan has actually failed and there's no audience left to perform for. I looked out the window at Aliner's roses, their last autumn blooms hanging heavy on the canes in the afternoon light. The refrigerator was nearly empty. Every grocery store in the city was picked clean, and in less than 48 hours, 40 people were going to knock on my front door expecting a feast. Before I tell you what I did next, comment ready so I know you're still with me, because what happens in the next few minutes changes everything for all of them. Just a reminder, this story contains some fictional elements built for storytelling and reflection. If that's not what you're here for, no hard feelings. This is your moment to step away. Tyler left the house at 5 in the morning. I know because I heard him, the jangle of keys, the low groan of the garage door, the deep, expensive rumble of that SUV engine turning over for the first time in weeks. I lay in bed and stared at the ceiling and listened to him back out of the driveway, and I felt something I hadn't expected to feel in that moment. Not satisfaction, not vindication, just a deep, hollow sadness for the boy who used to fall asleep on my shoulder during long drives, and who was now speeding through the dark streets of Phoenix trying to fix a disaster entirely of his own making. I got up at 6, made a coffee, and sat in Aliner's chair by the window. By 8:30 Tyler was back. I heard the garage door before I saw his face, and I knew from the sound of it, the way he killed the engine too quickly, the way his footsteps on the driveway were heavy and dragging, that he'd come home empty-handed. He walked through the back door into the kitchen and stood there with his shoulders caved inward and his jaw clenched so tight, a muscle jumped beneath his ear. His eyes were red, not from crying, from the particular burning exhaustion of a man who has driven all over a city for 3 hours and been told no at every single stop. Costco was a parking lot nightmare, he said, his voice cracked and raw. They ran out of turkeys yesterday. Fries, same thing. Safeway had nothing left. Trader Joe's doesn't even open today. He pressed both palms flat on the kitchen counter and dropped his head between his arms. I called 4 restaurants. 2 are closed. 1 has a 6-hour wait. The last one said they could do something, but it'd cost double, and they couldn't guarantee delivery before 3 in the afternoon. Kayla flew into the kitchen so fast her socks slid on the tile floor, and she had to grab the doorframe to stop herself. Her hair was half done, one side pinned up and the other loose, and there was mascara beginning under her left eye that she hadn't noticed yet. What do you mean there's nothing? Her voice climbed up into a register that made the windows feel fragile. Tyler, 40 people are coming in 2 hours. 2 hours? What have you been doing out there? I told you what I've been doing. Tyler's voice cracked on the last word, broke open like something under too much pressure. He spun around to face her, and his eyes were bright and wet at the edges now, glassy with a panic he could no longer keep contained. Every store is cleaned out, Kayla. Every single one. There is nothing left to buy. Kayla made a sound in the back of her throat, a high, strangled noise that was equal parts fury and terror, and pressed both fists against the counter beside him. This cannot be happening, she said, more to herself than to him. This absolutely cannot be happening to me today. That was when I walked into the kitchen carrying my travel bag. I'd packed it the night before, neatly, efficiently, the way I pack for every trip. 3 days of clothes, my medications, my phone charger, the small framed photograph of Aliner I take whenever I go somewhere she would have liked. I set the bag down by the back door, picked up my coffee mug and rinsed it at the sink. Kayla registered the bag before she registered anything else. Her eyes locked onto it like a heat-seeking device, and every bit of the chaos in her expression sharpened into one single point of disbelief. "What is that?" Her voice dropped dangerously low. "Gerald, what is that bag for?" I dried my hands on the dish towel and turned around. "I'm heading out," I said. "My friend Coach Marv has a place up near Sedona. He's been asking me to come up for Thanksgiving for 2 years now." I finally said yes. The color left Kayla's face the same way it had at the grocery store, fast and total, like a tide going out. "You are not serious right now." She took one step toward me, her voice shaking with a fury that had nowhere left to go. "You're not walking out that door today. Not today. My family is on their way right now. They're going to be here in less than 2 hours, and there's no food and the Wi-Fi isn't working, and you cannot just leave." I looked at her steadily. "You invited them," I said. "You planned this. You told Tyler to put me in the basement so your parents could have my bedroom." I picked up my bag. "So I'm giving you the whole house. You're welcome to it." Tyler stepped forward and his voice broke completely open, raw and desperate. "Dad, please. I'm asking you. Please don't do this. I know we messed up. I know it. But they're going to be here and we have nothing, and I don't know what to do. I genuinely do not know what to do, and I need you." I put my hand briefly on my son's shoulder. He flinched like the touch hurt him. "You're a grown man, Tyler," I said quietly. "Figure it out." I walked to the front door. Outside, the car I'd called the night before was already waiting at the curb, engine running, exhaust curling white into the cool morning air. Behind me, Kayla's voice rose into something that was almost a wail. "You can't do this. You cannot do this to us." I closed the door. The car pulled away from the curb and I watched my house grow smaller in the side mirror, the sage shutters Alina had chosen, the roses along the fence, the garage door where a $100,000 car sat silent on a dead battery, waiting. I faced forward and did not look back again. I was somewhere on Interstate 17 heading north toward Sedona when my phone buzzed with the first notification from the security camera app. I'd installed those cameras 3 years ago after a string of package thefts in the neighborhood, 2 at the front door, 1 covering the driveway and garage. I'd never disabled them. I'd also very deliberately never mentioned them to Tyler or Kayla. I pulled into a gas station, put the car in park, and opened the app. The footage was silent but vivid. I watched a convoy of rental cars and overpacked SUVs roll down my street and crowd every inch of available curb space. Doors swung open and people poured out, men in pressed button-downs, women in heels that were entirely wrong for a residential driveway, children already running ahead of their parents toward the front porch. 40 people right on schedule. Kayla appeared at the front door in a silk blouse she must have changed into specifically for this moment. Her smile stretched so wide and so tight it looked like it required structural support. She waved at the arriving crowd with both arms, projecting a hostess energy so aggressively cheerful it bordered on desperate. I watched Gordon step out of the first car. Kayla's father was a large man who moved through the world with the absolute certainty of someone who'd never once been told his opinion was unwelcome. He was wearing a sport coat on Thanksgiving Day, which told me everything I needed to know about how seriously he took the business of being impressive. He looked at the house, gave a single approving nod, and announced to no one in particular, "Now this is what I'm talking about. This is a proper home." Diane, Kayla's mother, floated out behind him in a cream cardigan, already scanning the garden with the critical eye of a woman cataloging everything she intended to comment on later. She paused at the rose bushes along the front fence, tilted her head and said, "These could use some attention, don't you think, Gordon?" Gordon did not answer because he was already halfway up the porch steps. It was late November. The roses were past their season. Diane would have found something to criticize regardless. The first crack appeared 12 minutes later, according to the timestamp on my camera feed. Tyler led the group to the garage for what I could only assume was the grand unveiling of the SUV. I watched him step forward and press the key fob with the confident showmanship of a man who'd been rehearsing this moment. The car's lights flashed once in response. Tyler reached for the door handle, swung it open, and gestured for everyone to gather around. Then he reached inside and pressed the ignition. The dashboard lit up. A warning icon appeared. I couldn't read it from the camera angle, but I didn't need to. I'd watched that car sit unmoved in my garage for weeks at a time. A battery does not survive that kind of neglect. The engine did not turn over. Tyler pressed the button again. Nothing. A third time harder, as though force might accomplish what mechanics could not. The car sat completely still while 14 people stood in a semicircle around it, their expressions shifting from anticipation to confusion to something that looked uncomfortably like amusement. Uncle Pete's voice carried even through the muffled audio of the exterior camera. He was a broad-shouldered man in his 50s who wore his opinions the way other people wear cologne, generously and without apology. "Is it supposed to do that?" he called out loud enough for the whole group to hear. "Because I got a '98 Civic that starts every time and it cost me $4,000, someone laughed. Then someone else. Tyler's face on the camera feed was a study in contained devastation, jaw tight, shoulders rigid, the particular stillness of a man trying very hard not to visibly collapse in front of an audience. Kayla grabbed his arm and steered him back toward the house, saying something through a smile so forced it looked painful. "It's just a little technical thing," she announced brightly to the group. "Come on inside, everyone. Dinner's almost ready." I watched the crowd disappear through my front door and thought about everything waiting for them inside: the empty kitchen, the 4 insufficient bags on the counter, the 2 overwhelmed bathrooms, the bedrooms that had never been prepared, and the Wi-Fi password that only I knew. There was no dinner. There was no feast. There was nothing but the wreckage of a promise Kayla had never had any intention of keeping herself. My phone buzzed again. A text from Tyler. "Dad, please just tell me the Wi-Fi password. Please. The kids are asking and Kayla is losing it." I set the phone face down on the passenger seat, pulled back onto the highway and kept driving north. The mountains around Sedona were turning red gold in the morning light, and for the first time in 2 years, the air in my lungs felt entirely clean. My phone rang at 3:17 in the afternoon. I was sitting on the porch of Coach Marv's cabin outside Sedona, watching the last of the afternoon light move across the Red Rock Hills, a cup of coffee warming my hands. The rocks here turned a particular shade of copper in late November that Alina had always wanted to see. I'd promised her we'd make the drive one day. We never got the chance. I looked at the screen. Kayla's name. I let it ring twice, breathed in the cold, clean air one more time and answered. "Hello, Kayla." She did not say hello back. What came through the speaker instead was a voice stretched so thin with fury and humiliation that it barely sounded like her anymore. "You did this on purpose." The words came out hot and fractured, each one hitting harder than the last. "You set all of this up just to embarrass me in front of my entire family. You planned every single part of this and you just walked out that door like none of it matters to you at all. You ruined my Thanksgiving. You ruined everything." I could hear the room behind her, the murmur of 40 people who'd gone very still, the way crowds do when they sense something real is happening. I kept my voice exactly where I wanted it. Low, steady, unhurried. "Did I invite them, Kayla?" A beat of silence on her end, hot, pressurized silence. "Did I agree to cook for them?" I continued. Did I agree to pay for everything, clean up afterward, and sleep in the basement so your parents could use my bedroom? Her breath came through the speaker in sharp, ragged pulls. That is not the point. That is exactly the point, I said. Tyler's voice broke in, strained and cracking at every edge. Dad, we're still family. Family is supposed to show up for each other. That's what you always taught me. You always said that. That one landed somewhere tender. I will not pretend it didn't. My chest tightened around it like a hand closing slowly into a fist. I gave you both a roof over your heads for 2 years, I said, and I made sure every word was clear enough to reach the back of whatever room they were standing in. No rent, no lease. I paid the electricity, the water, the internet, and most of the groceries. For 2 years. Today is the first time you have had to follow through on something you promised other people. I paused. Don't put that on me, son. Through the speaker, I heard the room shift, a murmur movement. Uncle Pete's voice somewhere in the background, low and pointed. She told us this house was practically theirs. Aunt Rosa's voice followed immediately. She said her father-in-law wanted to host everyone, that he was happy to do it. Then Denise, closer to the phone, her voice stripped down to something flat and unsentimental. Kayla, what exactly did you tell people? Kayla made a sound that was not quite a word, a high, wounded noise that came from somewhere behind her ribs, the sound of a person watching every carefully constructed wall come down at once. I heard her breathing accelerate, heard the tremor moving through it. Gordon's voice came through last, and it was the one that silenced everything else. He was not shouting. He did not need to. He spoke with the quiet, devastating precision of a man who has just understood the full scope of how badly he's been used. Kayla, he said, look me in the eye and tell me whose house this actually is. She could not answer him. I heard it in the absolute absence of her voice, where a response should have been, the sound of Kayla finally running out of things to say. I set my coffee cup down on the porch railing. Your guests, I said, your responsibility. I'm on vacation, I ended the call. The hills were going darker now, the copper light fading out at the edges. Somewhere down the hill, Coach Marv was starting a fire in the outdoor pit, and the smell of piñon smoke was drifting up through the trees, warm and clean and completely uncomplicated. I thought about Alina, about the drive we never took, about the view from this porch she would have loved. I picked up my coffee. It had gone slightly cold, but I drank it anyway, slowly, watching the last light leave the hills. Behind me, Coach Marv called out from the door. Steaks are marinating. You eat medium rare, right? I do, I called back. Good man, he said and went back inside. I stayed on the porch a little longer. Somewhere 3 hours south of me, 40 people were picking up their coats. I didn't need the camera feed to know it. Some things you simply know. I drove back to Phoenix on the morning of the 30th. Interstate 17 southbound was quiet that time of day. The kind of empty that only happens in the stretch between holidays when everyone has already gone where they needed to go. I'd spent 2 nights at Coach Marv's cabin, eaten well, slept deeply, sat on that porch long enough to remember what it felt like to exist without someone else's noise filling every available space around me. My phone had been mostly quiet. One text from Denise the evening of Thanksgiving, sent at 9:43 p.m. I'm sorry you had to deal with any of this. For what it's worth, I knew something was off the moment we pulled up. Take care of yourself, Gerald. I read it twice, then set the phone down and watched the fire burn low. One text from Gordon sent just after midnight. I didn't know the real situation. I should have asked before coming. I apologize for that. 8 words of accountability from a man I suspected did not offer them often. I appreciated them more than I would have expected. I did not hear from Kayla at all. When I turned onto my street, I saw the moving truck before I saw anything else. A white rental backed up to the garage, its rolling door open. Tyler was carrying a box down the driveway when my car pulled up. He stopped when he saw me. The box in his arms looked heavy, and his face looked heavier. He looked like he hadn't slept in 3 days, hollowed out, gray around the eyes, carrying himself like a man who'd been running on nothing. I got out of the car. He stood at the end of the driveway, holding his cardboard box and looking at me with eyes that had gone red at the rims, wet and raw and exhausted. "Dad," he said. His voice had nothing left in it. No angle, no strategy, no performance, just the word and everything the word was trying to carry. "Tyler," I said. He swallowed hard. His chin was trembling faintly, the way it had when he was small and trying very hard not to cry in front of me because he thought it would disappoint me. It never had. It did not now. "I sold the car," he said. "Private sale 3 days ago. I got enough to pay you back part of what I took and enough to put down a deposit on an apartment in Tempe." He shifted the box in his arms and I could see his knuckles were white around the edges of it. "It's small. It's on the 3rd floor and the elevator doesn't work and Kayla cried when she saw it." He paused. "She's still crying actually. She's upstairs finishing the last of the packing." I looked at my son for a long moment, at this man who had my jaw and his mother's eyes and who'd spent 2 years letting someone else make every decision that mattered. "I know I don't deserve another chance," he said, and his voice broke on the last word, just fractured clean through. "I'm not asking for one. I needed you to know that I know what I did. I know what I took from you. And I'm sorry, Dad. I'm genuinely sorry. That's all." My chest hurt with the specific ache of a father who loves his child and cannot fix what that child has broken and knows that fixing it is not his job anymore. "I know you are," I said. I put my hand on his shoulder briefly, the same way I had the morning I left, except this time he did not flinch. This time he closed his eyes for just a second, like the contact was something he needed to hold on to. Then I stepped past him and walked up to the front door. Inside the house was clean. Not perfect. There were scuff marks on the hallway floor, a dent in the baseboard near the kitchen door, a faint watermark ring on the side table where someone had left a glass without a coaster. But the clutter was gone. The rooms were quiet. The light came through Aliner's curtains the way it always had, warm and unhurried, landing in the same familiar places. Frank appeared at the fence within 10 minutes of my car pulling in. He had a coffee cup in each hand. "They gone," he called over. "Almost," I said. He passed a cup through the gap in the fence slats. We stood there while Tyler made 2 more trips to the truck and Kayla came down the porch steps with a duffel bag over one shoulder and her eyes so swollen from crying they were nearly shut. She did not look at me. She climbed into the passenger seat of the rental truck and pressed her forehead against the window glass. Tyler closed the truck's rolling door. He looked at me one last time from the end of the driveway. He lifted one hand. I lifted mine back. The truck pulled away from the curb. I watched it reach the end of the street and turn, and then it was gone. Frank took a slow sip of his coffee. "You doing okay? Better than I've been in 2 years," I said. That evening I took a turkey breast out of the freezer, the one I'd been saving for exactly this occasion, and roasted it slowly in the oven with rosemary and garlic, the way Aliner used to. I opened every window in the house to let the cool December air move through. I sat one place at the table, poured myself a glass of water, and sat down to eat. My phone buzzed once during dinner. Found a grocery store near the apartment, bought real food for the first time in a while. "Cooking something tonight. Just wanted you to know." I read it. I set the phone face down beside my plate. I finished my meal. I washed my dish. I made a small pot of decaf and carried it out to Aliner's chair on the porch, and I sat there in the quiet dark while the neighborhood settled in around me, the distant sound of someone's television, a dog barking twice and then stopping, the last of the autumn leaves moving through the garden in a slow, unhurried wind. The roses along the front fence were past their season now, their last blooms long gone. But the canes were healthy. They would come back in spring. Everything that's supposed to come back always does eventually. Some people ask me if I regret it. Honestly, not for a single day. I gave my son every chance a father could give. I gave him time, money, patience, and a roof. What I should have given him sooner was a consequence. Don't be like me. Don't wait 2 years hoping people will choose to do the right thing on their own. Kindness without boundaries isn't kindness. It's an open invitation to be taken advantage of. I learned that the hard way, and I hope you don't have to. If there's one thing this whole experience taught me, it's that God doesn't ask us to carry what was never meant to be ours. The moment I stopped carrying their life for them, I got mine back. This is what family justice looks like. Not anger, not revenge, just a man who finally stopped funding his own disrespect. True family justice begins the moment you decide your dignity is non-negotiable. Real family justice is quiet, patient, and absolutely certain. If this story moved something in you, drop a comment below, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe so you never miss what comes next. A quick note going forward, some stories on this channel contain fictional elements created purely to illustrate real human experiences. If that's not for you, no hard feelings. Choose what serves you best. Thank you for staying until the very end. It means more than you know. Sometimes justice isn't decided in a courtroom. It's decided by the choices we make. This was Cold Verdict. Because every story has a verdict.